In this session, we're going to talk about the web pages and how they're related to the model and how it all interacts with the component set. We're going to start out with bring up the login page for a website. And on an earlier session, I kind of mentioned how all of the pages can be designed in kind of like a wireframe, but also as what the end product is going to be. And then what we will do then is make all of the pages then dynamic with all the areas that need to be filled out and replaced or however it needs to interact with the back end. What I'm going to do here is kind of explain some of the pages. Employee logs in, the user password. There's also some information that's showing up here that's pertaining to the URL that the user typed in to get to this page. And from this, we're able to know kind of what company they're coming from, and we can scroll some information here and bring up some the color coding and these round images and stuff like that. But first page we're going to look at is the login page and the JSP page. Basically what the process is we take the original HTML and we go ahead and code in some JSP code. Everything else stays the same. So it's a good way to be non-intrusive as far as the design and layout and the graphics and everything of the page, and it allows us to use some components in here as JSP code that will automatically tie in and make interactive the web page. So I'll give kind of an overview of this. We'll have some other sessions that's going to get in more detail about how these components work and everything, but basically what it comes down to it is we're going off our model. Our model can drive everything, and just as simple as the login page, we're going to look at that in the process and see how it kind of ties this user logging in and what happens back in the program on the server side. So the layout here is an email address or user ID and a password, and there's an option for forget password. They can register here also, and then there's I mentioned the dynamic data that's automatically showing up here because we know kind of what company they're coming in. If we didn't know what company, it would automatically show a more generic look. It wouldn't be scrolling any logos and stuff like that. So within the code for those components, which are in HTML and CSS as far as how they're marked up and everything, and then they're also given tags, tag IDs. So using these IDs, the designer can go in there and set up the IDs, and what we can do is on the development side is we can use our JSP components, and here's a list of them that we're using on this page as Java code. Is we basically define the page as a form, and then we will build out the components that we want to add to that form. In this case, there's a text field, there's a password, there's a button here for the submit, and then there's a forgot password link, and then there's the slide div is what we're calling this here, and that's where it actually is sliding the images that we see scrolling down there, and then there's a register link also for the user to register. There's also, I think that's it for this page. So basically when the user types in the text field and then the password and then clicks on the button, we want some code to run. So what we can do is even within the page, the JSP code, is we can go ahead and put in what we want it to do here. And there's interactions then with the back end, the server side, and it has access to the model and everything else. Another thing that we can do is even remove all this this code here and put it into a Java object itself, and that Java object could then be bound to this login.jsp page, and that would separate completely the code from the HTML stuff. Usually what we do though is we end up leaving the code in here because it is kind of a block of code. It's not intrusive, and it makes it easy for us to see what's going on without kind of having multiple files pulled up and stuff like that. And there's some benefits that we get from it being JSP and how the class loader works and stuff like that. But basically what's going on, the use text field as an example, is it will create a text field component here. It will bind it to an ID called text username. Okay, If we use what is it, F11, whoops. If we used the Chrome's debugger, we could then look at the code that's sent to the browser, and this code's going to show us, tight here, there's a bunch of other information being sent in this page that we don't see in the page. All of this JavaScript jQuery code that gets sent to the page is automatically built into these components to output. All these components are added to the form, so we have this form here. The components are then added to the form by just using the add method, and then outside of the code we're basically telling the form to go get your script and output it to this page, because this page is being created on the server side and then sent as text. Again, HTML5 with JavaScript jQuery built into it. Is all of the components are then given an opportunity to send any JavaScript code to actually make these components interact with the HTML equivalent. So if I look at the HTML tag for this, it's basically an input here. Here's the ID. So on this page it's going to show an input, but it does not show the fact that it's interacting with the database and stuff like that. And that's a good thing, because then what we're able to do is then have our code, again, kind of a separation between the two, control the interaction and the binding of how they both work together. So now that we're able to have a password in a text field and then a button that gets clicked, when it gets clicked, this code gets called. We're able to, from the form, get the value of the ID and the password that was entered in, and then we have a delegate method object that we can call out to actually do the login. And most of our web apps that we do have a single kind of entry point into this JSP Delegate that's pretty small, and then its job basically is, in this case, it's to get the user logged in. Once the user's logged in, the user session then has the model set up for it for all the pages, and all the pages are then basically binding to the model. And we're going to see that in the next page that we're going to look at. So the JSP Delegate has a method here to validate if this is a valid employee or not. So it will basically call into a remote method to talk to the server and to get the employee. If it does find it, we'll return it back. If it does not find it, we'll return back a null. Our code in the page is basically looking to see what's returned back. If it does return back a valid employee, we go ahead and set that up for the session. Otherwise, we're going to print an error page and error message on this page. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and log in and then get to the next page. This page comes up and it's all dynamically controlled. One of the things I wanted to show is there's also some commands that we can run on a page that will show us everything that's dynamic. So everything that's in the aqua color here is all dynamic. And it's basically showing that all this information is interacting with the back end, including this here, but you can't really see around this, the fact that it's scrolling there and stuff. But we can see that there's a lot of things that we're able to tie in and bind to the pages. So now if I go back to OA debug, it shows it everything binding. I can also do a OA enable, and that just automatically turned off everything on the page from being bound to the back end. So this is the original page from the wireframe, and this is basically the designers being able to work on the pages, get everything working well, get the customer to buy off on the placement of everything and the verbiage and everything else, and then at the same time talk about the functionality of how some, in this case like the toolbar, some of these things are going to be on and off. We're going to be scrolling images here. this text, this image is going to be changeable based on how the program's set up and what the user's activity is. The same for this. This data here is automatically going to be populated. There's another area here that we can populate it with some other information, and we can have these auto scroll, and it's just on and on. The orange can be changed, these icons, this text, all this can be changed. And from the admin tool, we even set it up so what we're not binding to directly within our code to get the business requirements and everything down, they can also go in there and take any part of the page, any element within a page or a group of elements, and make them interchangeable in however they want. So I'm going to go back to enable the page. Again, now it's binding with the back end. Some things are changed around. This user has access to almost everything on here, so they're there. This is customized, and now we have some scrolling lists that automatically are getting the live data. This is automatically updated based on information also. The next example is going to go to the My Account. My Account basically for this employee goes to their account, is going to pull in information about all this information here. All this is dynamic because based on the user's access depends on what they can get into and what the program or the customer or the company has set up for kind of features and stuff that they want to include in this program. So that page here is this My Account Service Award.jsp. Originally it was called HTML, and again we did the same thing. Is we basically go in there and we put in a block of code that then is able to bind to all the different areas on the page. If we go into this OA debug, there's a lot of dynamic data. The cyan color basically means it's binding to it. The yellow means it's binding to it, and there's some AJAX going on with it. So most of the components have AJAX capability, and it kind of knows when to do an AJAX or when to do a submit or go ahead and just go to another page. So that type of functionality is built in there. Now getting the data that populates this, since this is a user, information that goes in here, and again back to the model, we have an employee which we know their name, we have another object that stores all their addresses, we have another object that has all their awards in, and then if we click on an award we want to take that someplace else, so we need a way to list those. So now we looked at the login page. The login page doesn't really tie into the model yet. Once the user's logged in, then they're in the system and we kind of know what to show them and stuff. So this page is all about the model. So within the JSP code, we're actually getting the employee's model. Again, when the employee logged in, we set up a session that tied to that employee. So now based on the session, we can access the employee. From that now, we're able to start tracking or having access to the different models. In this case, again, if we looked at OABuilder, we'd see the employee object, which we talked about earlier, how we have a model to go with that. From this model, we can get to everything that employee has access to. So now what we can do is we can take those models and we can start binding them to all the different places on the page. So like here's an address, and we want to use what properties and everything that we want to use. We want to format them and customize them for any rendering and stuff like that. Our table component, we basically add all the columns in. We can customize how the behavior is on it when it gets submitted. So the callback code can also be in here, which makes it kind of a nice self-contained solution. If we want to move that code out and have it more of a model view type control framework, we can do that also. But in a lot of cases, we're getting a lot of that already on how we're binding and how it's working with the model and stuff like that. So in a lot of cases, when it's self-contained within the page, we can pretty much leave it there. If it's something that's reusable in multiple pages, we either create a component out of that or we move it out of the code so it's in some place that's closer into the model or closer into the controller type functionality. An example of some code that we put into a component is a page controller. And there's common things within all these pages for this application that it controls. So instead of us having to deal with that every single time, we just have this page controller. We add the page controller to the form. The page controller knows how to handle all these common components on every page, and it will spit out all the JSP, all the JavaScript like code that will control those, turn stuff on and off, and interact with the HTML and stuff. The component set itself, you can see on this page that there's a lot of interactive components, and then again at the end it has all those components added to the form. And the form's basically given the opportunity to generate onto the page any of the script that needs to go to the browser, and that's how it pulls this. The components themselves are right here in a OAJSP, and we'll be talking about those next. It's a pretty complete set. It's the main benefit of it is how easy it is to recreate or create new components. So we can take third-party components and we can expand our existing components or whatever and set them up to bind into our model to make them usable in a page as easy as we did for all these. So again, we have existing pages that in a non-intrusive way or mixing the code or anything is we're able to control the code through these components. The components then have the capability to generate the JavaScript code that gets sent to the browser to make that interaction work. It's got the AJAX enabled. It's got a lot of other features based on the different component and what it does. But we also have components that can control any HTML element out there and customize exactly how you want to do. And if it's some custom behavior, usually you just build that into the page. If it's something reusable, we build it into a component. So that's kind of the process that we go through. So that's it for the introduction to the JSP.